Okay, so when
I
you
was about,
decided to go study at Florence Academy, then how did your parents respond to that? Because at that point, you're obviously taking it pretty seriously.
yeah, Charles Cecil, because there'll be a minor schism if I say it was the Florence Academy. It was Charles Cecil, so
Oh,
they were
oh, I
together.
apologize. I don't know the whole Italian setup there. Francis Bell, welcome to the Undraped Artist Podcast.
Thanks for having me, Jeff.
Yeah, it's my pleasure, and it was great to meet you at the Porch Society. I wish we could have spent a little more time together.
I know so many people. I felt like I met a fraction of all of the nice people I could have met. But that's the power of that conference, isn't it? There's so many people to see.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. And congrats on your award too. Your painting was really incredible. In fact, I don't typically do this, but I'm gonna start actually by showing people the painting that won you an award and remind us the award that you won.
I won second placed painting for
Amazing.
that, and I called it a portrait painter's painter because that man is Andrew Festing, who isn't as well known in the States as he is over here in the UK, but he's a really wonderful portrait painter, very well known over the last, well, 50 years or so. He's in his 80s now.
Hmm.
And he doesn't actually live very far from here. I'm not in London. I'm in the northeast of England near the Scottish border, and he is also in Northumberland. So I sort of hunted him down in the
Really?
lockdown period. Yeah, because he was so nearby. And it seemed like a wonderful opportunity when the world was kind of hibernating to go and speak to him. Obviously, he was happy to have me, and we did all the COVID stuff, and I got him for about 2 or 3 days, and he's just the most interesting man because he's had this extraordinary career, very, very unlike a modern portrait painter's experience. And so that was what was so interesting about talking to him. And as I did, I painted him and I actually took a friend of mine with me as well, called Phil Wilkinson, who made a little film of it. So, um, trying to put a little bit down on the record on him because he's the typical 81-year-old. He doesn't like technology. He hasn't
Hmm.
taken very good photos of his work.
No kidding.
And that's one of the reasons why actually he's not better known is that he's not very digitalized.
No kidding.
Um,
What a waste. Maybe I need to get him on the show. Although
oh,
he
he'd be
may not understand the technology to do what we're doing right now, or what would you say?
have to, I think I'd have to go and do it with him.
Well, we'll have
But
to talk
yeah,
about that because he sounds really interesting. But he doesn't even look 81. He looks, I would have guessed like 60 in your painting.
it's that mane of hair, isn't it?
Yeah, it's incredible. It's a gorgeous painting. I mean, it was one of my favorites in the show, no doubt. I absolutely love it. So, congrats to your success because I think this was your first time even applying to the porch
Actually,
study.
I'd done a couple. I've actually now been lucky, very lucky with the Portrait Society, and I've had a first prize, a third prize, and a second prize. So it's my, oh, I think I want to say fourth year
Oh my gosh,
applying.
I didn't even know. No kidding.
And
Congrats.
the first one was the lockdown year, which disappeared, and then it actually became the following year. And then last year I went to Atlanta, that's it, and got a third prize. And so this year was a second prize. So now I've
I'm
got all
sorry I
three.
missed you last year. I mean, of course I missed you during COVID, but I missed you last year. Well, that's unfortunate. Well, I'm great. I'm glad we finally got together and we got to talk. This is great. So
Oh, thank
let's back up a little bit now that we've talked about your painting. Tell me a little bit about your story. How did you get into painting? And well, tell me a little bit about your childhood and how you ended up being interested in this and got into it.
It's a bit of a tangential move from my childhood. I had a lovely childhood, but it was quite kind of Wordsworthian countryside type of childhood where I did a lot of rolling through the fields and not very much culture. So it's not completely obvious that I would have got into art, except that my mum is an artist and she does dry media mainly, pastels and pencils and stuff. And she went to art school, but then she got married really, really young, and that was kind of that. So we grew up really very outdoorsy,
Mm-hmm.
active, really sporty kids. And so the whole really dedicated interest in painting wasn't really in the stars at all. But I really did have wonderfully supportive parents. So when I met a good friend from home who had been to Charles Cecil, I ended up speaking to her, looking at her folder of work, and I would have been about 16 or 15 or something. And I just thought, that's ideal. That's exactly what I want. And there was nothing like that in Britain then. It was very cool, trendy Brit art, kind of Tracy Emin, Damien Hirst. I don't know if they've traveled the Atlantic, but very trendy, conceptual and installation work. And it really had more or less monopolized our educational art scene. So if I'd tried to find anything in the UK, it would have been quite difficult just then.
Mm-hmm.
So this place in Florence, pre-internet, you couldn't just Google everything. It wasn't pre-internet, but I mean, no one really was using the. So honestly, without this friend, I don't know if I would have ever heard of Charles Cecil. In fact, I'm sure I wouldn't have, given how unconnected to the art world we were. And so luckily, that was just a lucky bounce for me that I had a mate who was there. So I went to have a look at it, thought, perfect, who wouldn't want to be in Florence anyway?
Mm-hmm.
And training there, and I set off when I was 18 to do 3 years at Charles Cecil. So,
Okay, and I don't I see I'm so rude and I'm not politically correct at all. So tell me about what date that was. I'm just curious about what year that was that you went there.
I went in 2001
Okay.
and left in 4. So
So you've
yeah,
been done for
uh,
20 years almost now. You've been doing this for 20 years professionally.
I'm 40 at the weekend.
Oh,
So
happy birthday.
thank you.
So, okay, but as a child, did you draw at all? I mean, you must have known you had some talent.
It was quite late though. I mean, I was a frustrated draftsman. I would draw something and immediately be furious because I wasn't doing it how I wanted to.
Hmm.
And I was that sort of angry child. I'm like, well, that's hopeless. I hate that, and I'll throw it away and rip it up, that kind of. I did have a really good art teacher at school who was very supportive. Again, a lot more conceptual, a lot less support for the traditional representative side of the art spectrum. You were encouraged to express yourself by sort of throwing things against the wall and stuff like that, which was fine. He was very, very keen on us being passionate about it, though, so I'm very grateful to him. But I would have been really nascent interest in art was about 14.
Wow.
As I said, we were we were keen. My brother, actually, I remember him winning art prizes when he was young, but there wasn't a lot of it in our water. We were just we were much more of an outdoor sort. But yeah, I had an interest, but I wouldn't put it more strongly than that.
Okay, so when
I
you
was very
decided to go study at Florence Academy, then how did your parents respond to that? Because at that point, you're obviously taking it pretty seriously.
Yeah, Charles Cecil, because there'll be a minor schism if I say it was the Florence Academy. It was Charles Cecil, so they were
I
together.
apologize. I don't know the whole Italian setup there. So Charles Cecil is his own thing.
Yeah, yeah, yes.
Oh,
And Dan Graves is the Florence
that's
Academy, and
right.
briefly.
That's right. Forgive me, all the people in Florence. I yeah, keep I got that wrong. Okay, so Charles Cecil.
Yeah, no, they were freaking out. I remember my dad just reminding me that I wouldn't have any private means and that this was an incredibly risky financial decision and they were going to be really supportive, but that this really had to go well. Otherwise, or else kind of thing. But I had their full support. And I mean, crucially, as I'm sure you speak to a lot of people who didn't have this luxury, I left without any debt. They paid for me to go. So
Hmm.
I was very, very, very fortunate. and they were fantastic. But they were really worried. I mean, this is just the most financially unsound set of decisions for a person, really, on the face. Right? Um, there was a certain amount of panic, but actually a huge amount of support. So I'm very grateful to them.
Okay, so then what happens after you're done with Charles Cecil? Where'd you go from there?
Well, I did go back and teach every summer for about 6 or 7 years at Charles Cecil, and I started doing commissions. And yeah, it was really fairly unlucrative, to say the least. But I started very modestly, nice people, people who were friends, charging virtually nothing, doing some pretty dodgy stuff, I should think, and just very, very slowly beginning to understand the commission environment versus the studio environment, which is quite, it's a different sort of a thing. You have a lot more control, you have time and leisure to pursue a project possibly for weeks. You're suddenly in a commission environment where people have a matter of days to give you. You suddenly confronting the reality of having to use photographs for things that aren't important, like clothes, and so it was a very steep learning curve. But I'm very grateful to those early patrons because it's a bit of a roll of the dice
Hmm.
commissioning a very, very green painter.
Okay, I want to come back to this, but now you got me curious. So maybe you could educate me a little bit about what the difference in your mind is between your education and what Charles Cecil teaches, and what, obviously, you didn't attend the Florence Academy, but what you perceived the Florence Academy to teach. And why did you choose Charles Cecil? What did he have to offer that really
Yeah.
um,
Well,
inspired you?
going backwards, in reverse order, I chose Charles Cecil because it was as simple as having a point of contact there.
Okay.
Go- as a teenager, seeing it, really liking it, and thinking that's great.
Okay.
Um, was I aware as fully as I ought to have been of the Florence Academy? No. I didn't go shopping in that way. I didn't go and look at all of the schools in Florence because there's also the Angel Academy too. So there were three that I would have known of. And on to the differences. Charles has possibly more, happy to be contradicted by any Florence Academy diehards, but possibly more of a focus on everything being life size. We don't do bar drawings, and it's more life size. So we don't do, apart from in the figure room, much under life scale. So I think the education was very heavy on endlessly doing very strictly sight size heads. So
Right.
you did loads and loads. Whereas I see out of the Florence Academy, I see more variety, and that's obviously a plus for them. But in my case, I didn't actually mind that we were very rigorous on life size heads, the repetition of that um, endlessly, and obviously larger projects, you would do 3/4 lengths and full lengths and things as you got going. The only under life size things that we ever did was news, and that was 3 hours a day. Um, and the rest of it was all life size. I think that's probably the major difference. Philosophically, I don't think there's much of one. I think they stem very much from the same root. Yeah.
And I noticed, I was looking at some of your drawings. They're absolutely brilliant, beautiful. The
Oh,
gesture in your drawing and everything is gorgeous. I'm curious what the approach to drawing was with Charles Cecil.
well, yeah, I mean, all of it was very strictly sight size. So we had
Oh, it
a
was.
lot. Yeah, yeah. No, we were always on a very, very strict, literally down the ear. You would spend 10 minutes kicking your easel so precisely into place um, every morning. And so the rigor on shapes was at 110% all of the time. Um, and the same would be I mean, for anything. And the only time we weren't on life scale size was in the figure room. So
Okay. So
yeah,
you would have your easel like right next to the model, and then you'd
yeah.
back up. Because I never did site size. So this is all a little
Oh,
bit
right.
unfamiliar to me. So
Yeah,
you must have had your easel right next to the model, and then you'd back up in order to get life size.
absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, no, you're two people per model, usually, in a portrait sense. So you would have an easel on each side, and you would be able to sight, if you were to go alongside your canvas and look down the surface of it, right into the ear of your model. And what would count in Charles's version of sight size would be anywhere where that scale locked in on the head.
Mm-hmm.
But you're the ear, right? So then you're stepping back 3 meters, probably more if you're lucky, if you've got enough space, and then you're remembering what you see from back there, keeping it in mind, not looking up close really. You might do a bit, but not really. Remembering what you've done, and then marching up to the canvas, putting your brush down, your mark down, whatever, and then retreating again. So the whole thing is a memory trick from 3 meters back to represent what you've remembered from back there on the canvas. So yeah,
And then
you're
you go
doing
back
about
and check if you
yeah,
remembered correctly. So what about
yeah.
when you get into value? Do you back your easel away at that point and start working from further back, or do you still work from memory once you start rendering?
Yeah, this is where there's so many different ways of describing the process, but I've noticed that there's a sort of Atlantic difference. When you say value, do you mean like the tones, like the lights and darks?
Right.
Or okay, yeah, all of that from up from that original position. I
Oh,
mean, this is I have to say this is what we were taught in school. Now I think of sight size as an exceptionally useful tool that can occasionally be loosened or dispensed with entirely. But in terms of the training, the whole thing, every almost stitch of it is done from that position. And therein, I think, lies a slight weakness. I mean, there would be times when, for example, this is just one example, but um, Jamie Routley and I were actually discussing this at the conference when we were talking about our training. There are times when you would paint in a very sharp side light, so your model would be lit dramatically from the side. So obviously that meant that your canvas was set up such that light was raking across it at this extreme angle. So you
oh,
basically didn't have much light on your on your work,
right.
and you work away for 3 weeks and then turn it round and see the mess that you had,
Mm.
um, because you had got on with it in that way, and such was the strictness of being always sight size that there were occasional issues like that. Yeah, so the whole thing was done totally strictly along those sight size lines. Yeah.
And then, but now you're doing more complex stuff. I mean, you're doing multi-figure portraits. You're doing portraits where you
Yeah.
clearly, if you do life size, you can't be next to the model because it's full length. So tell
Yeah.
me about how your process has evolved from that.
I think I described earlier how different it is to be in a commission environment.
Yeah.
That's one of the things, the forces that starts pushing on you quite quickly when you leave. And the other thing that is an influence is a desire to paint a greater variety of poses, of positions, to, for example, paint down onto the floor. Can't sight size that unless you have an extraordinary room and a sort of weird
You
scaffold
have
to
to hover above the canvas.
get. So this immediately temptations start appearing where you don't want to be restrained entirely by this incredibly helpful. I've never disowned it. I've always said sight size is really one of the most incredible tools. But it is like any tool, it can be a bit of a tyrant if you're not willing to be very flexible. So I very quickly started to break a few rules. And that's fine. I think that this is the optimistic view. There'll be people who disagree, but this is my view. If you use it well in your training and you really do, in a very disciplinarian way, repeat your lessons with sight size again and again over 3 years, however long you train for, you are then hopefully robust enough with your proportions and your tendency to get scale roughly right, and to break it from time to time, and then possibly a lot,
Mm-hmm.
and go out and use it as a tool rather than be committed to it as a kind of marriage.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is my view. So I frequently don't sight size now. In fact, I don't even think about it. There are times when I automatically find I'm sight sizing away. And then there are other times, for instance, I went to London to do a few commission starts, and they were little children. And you don't really want to set them up in that way where they feel that you're rather weirdly staring at them and they're up there on a pedestal.
Mm-hmm.
It's best just peer into the corner and not be there. You're going to
Mm-hmm.
get a better chance. So there's just so many reasons why in the real world, faced with a number of different challenges, you might decide not to use it. And yeah, so as you say, multi-figures, different angles, all of that stuff, you find in fairly short order that it's actually less useful than other things. Yeah.
Yeah. So tell me about color in Charles Cecil's school. What did you learn about that? Or what set
I
it
don't,
apart in your mind?
yeah, I hope I won't be excommunicated for saying this, but it wasn't very important to Charles,
Okay.
colour. So he had this primary interest, and if you were to speak to him now, I think he would say this, that your values, your tones, as Brits would say, that's the primary thing, always. Never any point in thinking about colour as a fundamental principle. You might consider it later on, but not really. So everything I've learned about colour, again, very grateful for my training. It was amazing, but that's largely been a sort of post-educational interest.
Mm.
Done it on my own. I've done it on the hoof. I haven't really ever gone into the science of it. I don't think about it much. It's an instinctive thing.
Hmm.
As for that's probably a difference, between Dan Graves and the Florence Academy and Charles. Maybe they spend more time on color. Yeah,
So
probably.
where have you come in that? Let me rephrase that. So, I mean, so what are your feelings about color now? I think most realists would agree that value is more important than color. Even a colorist would agree with that. But then a colorist still really is interested in color on top of value.
Yeah.
So, where do you lie on that now? How important is color in your work?
I think it's very important as long as it doesn't bully the values or start replacing them. Sargent called himself an impressionist, but it's interesting how he always had his colours exactly under his boot, and the values worked as well. So if you can strike some happy balance between values and colour, that's great. It's really hard though. My personal view is that I inherited, unsurprisingly, a limited palette from Charles Cecil. I mean, literally, what was on it? Ivory black, a vermilion, probably, possibly an alizarin if you were feeling incredibly reckless, ochre,
Okay.
a lead white, and then the exciting thing would be an ultramarine blue. So what
Wow.
people call the Zorn palette, that which is always odd because he seemed to have other things on there, but what loosely is called the Zorn palette, that was what we had.
Okay, so what about you now?
Well, I'm looking over. I've got a black, I've got an ultramarine blue, an alizarin, a vermilion, ochre, two Naples. Oh no, sorry. Yeah, two Naples yellows, a dark and a light, white, a cadmium yellow, and a cerulean.
Wow, you are
I,
really reckless.
yeah,
You're
and a
wild.
brief flirtation with some greens, which were just too much for me, and I had to.
That's funny. I have like 28 colors on my palette. You'd be so ashamed.
Not at all. People always talk to me knowingly about color, and I have to pretend I know what they mean. Um, it's quite limited, yeah. So I see other people's palettes and I see what a busy palette looks like, and
Hmm.
that's not what I have. But um, you know, I think it is rather personal, isn't it? People go on
Yeah,
and
it
on
is.
about color. Yeah, so
Yeah,
that's
it is.
me.
Okay, so when you left Charles Cecil, and you said that there were obviously some major, um, I don't know how you put it, roadblocks, some major hurdles, some changes you had to adapt to. Can you talk a little bit more about that? What that transition was like from going from student to professional?
Yeah, I think it's always bumpy because the hard realities of life really do come at you quite quickly. Everything from, you have to pay tax. You have to suddenly communicate with people properly. You have to be a professional. You have to have a mobile studio. You have to figure that out. What does that involve? You take a lot of time because you've just left school and you aren't very quick yet, and that's a bit rocky. And here's hoping you have some nice, kind clients to start you off. I still very, very, very much depended on paintings from life. And again, for those of you who are younger millennials, it's impossible to imagine this, but if you wanted to take photographs of things to cut corners, I would have thought of it then, like clothing or a hand or something. It was a really agonizing business involving a really crappy digital camera that took appalling pictures. And you then had to actually go to a place and get them developed into, it was just so, it creaked and groaned, my method, and it was laborious and difficult. And I was actually, I have to say, very happy in my work. I was loving it. I always liked commissions. I still do. I love them now because you get to meet these amazing people and it's so fun. You get to try people's lives on and get to move into their worlds, and it's really, it's an incredible privilege. But there's no question it wasn't exactly a smooth professional thing. It took years for me to know what I was doing and how to do all that stuff. It was yeah, so I'd say, what was that, 2004. I do about 9 months of that and then go back and teach again for a month or 3 months, depended on what was going on. And then back again to commissions. And it just proceeded like that until 2012. I got married in 2011, had my first child in 2012, and then another in 2014. So in that period, we had a financial crash, and that knocked me off the rails completely. I just wasn't at all established enough to withstand that kind of economic turbulence. Um, but by 2012, after I had my first child, I was working quite hard actually. That was the beginning of really regular work. Yeah. So it had taken 8 years to
Wow.
get going.
Yeah, it's
Mm.
funny you mentioned the recession because I started my career in 2002, which was a recession. I don't know if that one was as much worldwide, but at least here. Um,
Mm.
and then had a similar experience. It was like, oh my gosh, the timing couldn't be worse. It's like I literally leave school and there's a recession waiting for me. Fortunately, things
Waiting for
worked
you.
out okay, but by 2008, I was a little more established, so I was able to ride it out.
Yeah.
But yeah, so those recessions can be scary for artists because we're a
Really?
luxury, a luxury item.
Yeah. There's nothing I mean, as much as I think art is the pinnacle expression of a civilization, there isn't actually in a day-to-day moment for any one family anything necessary about a painting, unfortunately. And
No.
so I feel for people now. I mean, I'm not sure what it's like in the States, but we've got what we're calling a cost of living crisis over here. I'm not sure if it's the same wording over there, but um, people are struggling. Yeah. So
Yeah.
I feel that I've done it myself, and it's really hard. Yeah.
So how did you find your first commissions when you got out of school?
Do you know, I wasn't nervous. It's quite a slow burn. I've never been nervous. I get nervous about sort of short things, like things that happen very quickly, and like public speaking or something like that. But I actually quite enjoyed it. I enjoyed the interactions. I didn't always enjoy the struggle because it is quite hard work. You've got to really work at those likenesses and you've got to involve. And this is another difference between education and commissions. You are, to a greater or lesser extent, collaborating with another person about this picture, or maybe two people, or maybe even three. And they are hugely invested in that person. They may be married to them, or they may be their parent or something. And suddenly their opinion really matters. And, you know, you've never had to think about that before. You've just been thinking about shadows, likenesses, and there's the nose in the right place and all that kind of thing. And then suddenly you are in the thicket with parental emotions, spouse you know, it's quite dense territory. I have to say, though, on balance, I quite like that. In fact, to this day, then, now, and always, the one that's a bit freaky is the institutional commission where no one really cares
Oh,
whether you go.
really? That's
Like,
been your experience. What
whatever.
about the model? Doesn't the model care?
Yeah, a bit, but you know, I've only had a couple of these. Mainly, yeah, everyone cares, but there's something rather eerie about, I don't know, a person who's just, the painting's never going to be involved with them. It's just going in a boardroom. You
Right,
know,
right.
they don't really care. Um, as I say, that's really, really infrequent. Mostly people do care. Yeah.
Yeah. I just finished one and the client did care, but the commissioner didn't, right? I think that's the difference. It's like they care, but does it really matter because they're not the one flipping the bill? Right.
Yeah.
The institution is just has to be happy. Of
Yeah.
course,
Yeah.
yeah, of course it's nice to make the person in the painting happy too, but
Yeah. Funny that because I've just done one, and the people paying for it is a college, and the guy I'm painting he's amazing. He won the Nobel Prize, and so I've really enjoyed painting him. He's fascinating, and he cares. And I spoke to him and his daughter, and then the college. I suddenly realised I hadn't involved them at all,
oh, no kidding.
and you know, because they had more or less said that was fine, but I had said I'll liaise with this guy, right, direct, and you know, I'll let you know how I get on. And I sent it through in the end, and they were happy. But I tend to always focus my interest on the person sitting and a few loved ones quite near to them, because I reckon they're going to give me really good feedback. But it is different for everybody on how they go about it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Do you have any, obviously you have to be sensitive to your clients, but do you have any interesting experiences, unusual experiences with portrait commissions that you could share?
Yeah. I don't know actually how you've got to be careful, obviously.
Yeah.
I mean, nothing's springing out of the kind of wow, that was an extraordinary experience bank.
Hmm.
Um, I think if you can, well, yeah, this is so individual. Each artist is so different, but I do involve them. I take them with me. They can see the beginning, they can see the messy bit, you know, the chaos at the beginning. I don't mind that at all. They can look at the lay-in and the madness, and I will say to them, if something occurs to you, then tell me. I'm not saying I'm going to, you know, leap to your demand and do exactly what you just suggested, but it's certainly interesting to me.
Mm-hmm.
Um, because these are people who love these guys sitting for me, you know, and they've known them for all their lives, possibly. It could be an incredibly deep relationship. And they might, and it's very often has actually been the case. I don't know about you, but the loved one, the near, the you know, the spouse or the whatever, the child will provide that little tiny puzzle piece that you didn't think you even needed, but they've just said it, and you think, God, yeah, it's much more human now. Now that you
Mm.
said that, so I mean, you know, speaking of, you know, Andrew Festing, I don't think he did as much of that. You know, we're talking about this with him. But there are lots of people who do, lots of people who don't. So I don't think there's any sort of universal wisdom there at all, but I do actually quite like hearing what people think.
Yeah.
The only thing I've read is when a sort of 55-person WhatsApp group is set up, and then you're going to get far too much opinion.
Oh, yeah.
So you just say a couple of people, just to, not too many, uh, and with any luck, they will give you thoughtful, considered feedback.
Hmm.
But no, I'm really boringly. I don't have any kind of hilarious anecdotes
No,
about
it's
commission.
okay. It's okay. I mean, I think of the one of the funniest that I've had, not funniest, it was awesome, but a lot of times I feel like the client is really nervous at that ugly stage in the painting where they're like, you put in 5 strokes and they're like, why doesn't it look like me yet? And I'm like, because it's 5 strokes, right? And then, but this one painting I did years ago, every time the client, she was probably in her 70s, sweet lady. Every time she'd come behind the canvas, she'd be like, oh, I'm exquisite. Or, oh my gosh, you've made me look so regal. Or, and she's just like, she was so good for my ego. It could have been a mess, and she's just loved it. It was like, I've never had a client like her. She was just the most
Oh,
positive person I've ever worked with. It was a trip.
oh,
But
well, yeah. That's go forth and multiply that lady. That's
I know, seriously. Yeah, she was great.
yeah.
So you work, I'm getting that you still work mostly from life now, then.
Yeah, it's a rule of thirds, I'd say. About a third from life, a third from reference photos, and then a third without anything. And that bit's quite a big third, actually, that last part. So at that point, they they'll be in a studio, which is this shed here, or I'll move them around the house, or I like to see them in lots of different light. I
Really?
like to, yeah, I like to leave them up and out of the way somewhere, and then
Oh, the
not look at them.
paintings, not the subject.
Yeah, yeah, no,
Oh, okay.
they're
I'm like, why are you moving the subject around? You're like, let's go outside. It's cloudy. We'll see what you look like on the cloudy day.
oh, no, no, I'm
Okay.
not. I'm not a sadist. That would be awful. Um, the paintings, they tend to then go on little field trips around the house
Right.
just to see how in different circumstances. And I might work on them under artificial light or under natural light, just to make sure that they are communicating fairly consistently across a number of environments. Um, but yeah, no, I do work from life. I think it's still the best advice anyone could ever be given as a painter.
Hmm.
So I try to keep that up. I certainly, and this is rather heartbreaking because, as I'm sure you can imagine, the posthumous portrait thing comes up, and I'm sure it does for you too. And I almost always say no to those because I just know I'm not going to produce the right thing for something so incredibly deeply emotional for the people. And so I don't really do that. But that's because I know that that from life bit is really, really important
Well, not to
for me.
mention you didn't get to take the photos, even if you did work from photos.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah, no,
exactly.
I always reject those too, which I always feel bad, but they're just too much.
They're too much. There's so many emotions riding on it too.
Hmm.
It's a particularly difficult thing to say no to, but I don't do them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about that process, the one third, one third, one third process. What do you do from life? What do you do from photos? What do you do from imagination? And how and what's the order in that process?
Usually a straightforward one, two, three. Start with from life. That's something about laying in blank canvas, going to a rough head, the kind of thing that those guys are doing in the Portrait Society. That very quick work that you were all doing at various stages. Less finished than that. It's not for show. It's really just foundational time from life. It would be amazing if you also got another sitting at the end of the process in the from imagination part,
Hmm.
but chances are it's going to be difficult unless geographically they're near here, which is unlikely. So let's assume they're not. I'd hope to get somewhere around 10 hours in a good day with them. So I've made a really
10 hours
fairly
in one
solid.
day?
No, 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 no,
Oh,
no.
okay.
A break? No, God, they'd be
Yeah, they
corpses, I would have
die.
thought. So it's broken up into whatever they can manage, and
Okay.
it might be as much as that, but it should be something around there. Um, then, so you do that over whatever period of time you get them for. Then off it comes and it dries, and I then will start thinking with my reference photos about everything else. And at that stage, at that very first stage, there might be a bit of a hand, there'll be a body and outline of where everything is. So compositionally, it's all looking quite sensible, but it will be very rough and mostly just the head. So everything else is just kind of suggested with a kind of mucky brush. I mean, it's really not important for me at that point. Then I take it away home here, look at my photos and start building at that point. Lots of layers of, I would start thinking about my colors, start thinking about where emphasis is going to be, what I want to lose, what I want to keep, how is it going to look lifelike, where is the movement coming from. It's very important to me that people look like they are about to do something in the process of something. So I start thinking about that. And intermingled with the sort of latter half of that second bit from reference photos, I'll start doing quite large chunks without the reference photos at all to try and make it so that it lives a bit on its own. Hard to explain what you're really doing there, but
Okay,
you're
before
just
you go with this, because I want to try and keep it in order. I've got questions about the first
yeah.
part still. So when you're working from life, well, you said that when you take it home and back to your studio and you're done, you've got that 10 hours done, then you start thinking about color. I was under the assumption that that was the whole point in working from life, is to see the color. Or is there something else you're looking for when you work from life?
For the color is there. I could show you one. The color is there, but I'm not. I think this might be a Charles Cecil hangover. I am thinking about shapes, tones, values, and color as a sort of also ran. It's not a major feature
Hmm.
yet, and almost certainly going to disappear. And I'll refine my views on the color as it goes along. I mean, to the extent I should correct myself on one thing, I'm thinking about color when I'm setting up the picture. So they're not just sitting there in any old t-shirt. I will have thought about, whether this is going to have a dark background or a light background. So to that extent, I'm thinking about color in the beginning, but I'm not obsessing over it in any way at all. That's all going to come later.
What about flesh tones? Are you thinking about flesh tones in that first 10 hours?
Yeah, yeah. I can show you. This is not going to help you, is it? If I
Sure,
get a
no, it
painting.
would be great. I think people would love to see. I certainly would.
Okay. So these are much less time because there are very small children. But where have they got theirs little
Okay.
thing?
Yeah, I've got a pretty good shot of that.
Very pixelated. Hang on,
Yeah,
trying to
but I
move it
think we
around.
get the idea. It
Okay,
probably looks
so
better on my side than yours.
so that was for somebody who's 5. I really was happy that he sat there for 2 hours. So that's 2 hours there. And that is obviously a lot less than the ideal 10, but again, he's 5.
Right,
So
right.
I've got obviously dark hair, I've got his pinkish cheeks, and yes, a warm ear, but a lot of that's going to change. So it might be that we have discovered a fundamental difference between ourselves, Jeff. So what are you doing in your laying in phase then? You're thinking
Well,
about
I
toes?
mean, if I'm, well, for a long time, for many years, as my audience already knows, because I've mentioned this a few times, but I did everything from life, like religiously. But the reason I ask is simply because I'm curious, because now I do implement photography some, and my instincts, whether wrong or right, are that photography seems like a good tool for drawing, where working from life seems like the place to learn about sensitivity and subtle color shifts, or even value shifts. So I would, yeah, so I would, yeah, I would lean more on drawing in with the photo, getting a good likeness from the photo and getting good color from life. So that's why I was curious. That's why I was curious about that.
Yeah, I think we have an upside down approach. Yeah. So I would go the other direction. I'm going to get what I think of as fundamental blocks of proportion, um, quite rough, not quite as rough as that, but again, when they're young, it tends to be a bit more rushed. And then you take that away and then build. Obviously, you might need to iron out the odd thing on proportions, but then you build from there, and color comes with the layering up of paint as I go along.
When you're
Having
working from
taken, I don't,
photos and imagination, that's when the color comes in. So you must be
yeah,
drawing on past experience then, just drawing on your knowledge of seeing so many faces.
and seeing that particular face, back to why you don't do posthumous portraits. Yeah, a big reason for me is that if I haven't seen it and if I haven't drawn it from life, painted it from life, then it's just not in there. I can't resurrect any of those memories. I can't reconstruct in my mind. I can't do any of that stuff. And I think we're very influenced by what we have seen and drawn from life. There's a kind of bedding in that happens in the brain. And that's not happening if you're just looking at photos. It's not there. So yeah, if I'm going along and I discover that I'm giving this person far too much, I don't know, that they're coming out too olive looking or too kind of ochre, then I will just know that I'm wandering off the path because I will remember what they were like. And the photos are always crap. I mean, I just have iPhone photos. They're not.
You're shooting with an iPhone? Really?
Yeah, I'm just snapping away. Like there's nothing. I don't use photos. I don't go with a proper camera and do it. And so I'm using quite a lot of my memory interwoven with all of this. And another backup for that argument is that I don't tend to have very good recall. If I were to leave that little boy, he's got a sister too, they're twins. If I were to leave him for 6 months and come back to him then, having not looked or thought about him in the meantime, a hell of a lot of that would have dripped out, and I would be really struggling to recollect him. So I tend to paint them within a 6 month period as well, so that I have recall
Okay.
on a lot of.
Yeah. I don't think our process actually is upside down. I mean, or opposite, because considering you're working from an iPhone camera, it would be completely irrational since it's a wide angle lens to try and get a likeness from that. It makes perfect sense to me that you're working those things out from the model and then using your memory of that experience to work out the color. Now that I know that.
Yeah, that's probably a cleaner way of putting it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I think that's right. No, the iPhone photos are almost uniquely bad on color, actually, aren't they?
Yeah, they tend to exaggerate it. I mean, it gets totally overdone, blown out. Not blown out, that's the wrong word, but exaggerated, yeah.
It's a very odd thing you get, but it's a reminder, and that's what I need. And I'm not going to be able to. I don't have photographic memory or anything extraordinary like that, so I'm not going to be able to remember anything like enough, without those references in the time that's realistic, especially with something that's somebody who's young like that 5-year-old. Um, so yeah, there's a lot of memory in there, but don't you think that's sort of everybody? I think everyone
No,
is
I think
remembering.
so. Well, anyone that works from life, even in part, you have to, I think you have to have some level, you have to depend somewhat on memory. Because even if the
Yeah.
model's sitting in front of you for the entire time, most professionals are talking to the model's not perfectly still. I mean, I was watching some of your videos on your channel and they were time lapse, and it's always fun to watch those because well, for me, it just is always a reminder of just how much the model changes, because when they're time lapse, the model's just like bouncing all around and you see how much they're changing as you're
So,
drawing. So you
um,
really have to you really have to work from memory. You kind of have to freeze them in a particular spot that looks right to you, that you like, and then keep on working from that position.
That's, I think that's also the truest dilemma of a commission painter, especially, is that you have to talk to these people. I
Hmm.
mean, very young children, take them out of it, but anyone else, you've got to see these people animated and
Hmm.
immediately into a problem with painting from life because they're all over the place. So
Hmm.
you're doing flexible interpretation as part of your from life discovery process anyway, and the fundamentals that are going down are very from lifey. You know, you're going to have little errors everywhere because you at no point let that person sit still.
Mm-mm.
So I mean, I dread a pause, a silence in the studio when there's a model in there, when I've got a client, because I mean that really suggests that they are now settling into that static kind of TV watching face
Hmm.
that happens. People sit quietly in a darkened room, and I don't
Yeah.
want that.
It's funny you should say that because for so many years while I was working only from life, I got this same unsolicited suggestion over and over and over again because I would be doing like lots of children, from life. And occasionally I would be like, oh my gosh, that was brutal. And someone would say, why don't you put them in front of a TV? As though that never occurred to me, right? I'm like, gosh, that's brilliant. Why didn't I think of that? But the reality is you can't put them in front of TV because you just said it. They get that TV face, that terrible TV face where they look like they're sort of like half dead, half alive, not totally conscious, you know.
I do use iPads now, I have to say, a bit for structure, but it's vital that you get to look at them, talk to them, play with
Mm-hmm.
them,
Mm-hmm.
and again, I will involve the parents because they know their children inside out, obviously, um, and you hope that they'll give you something. But that's a tightrope walk if ever there was one. Anything under the age of 8. But it is fun and they are hilarious and adorable. So no,
Mm-hmm.
it's enjoyable.
Mm-hmm.
I had to cut my teeth on my own children, who yeah, I've got one who'll sit perfectly and then another one who won't.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, my children tortured me too. It was tough, but good memories at the time. Once I painted my daughter and I was literally almost in tears. She was 7 and I was begging her to just
Yeah,
not just walk away.
exactly.
It wasn't
Oh, you
moving. It
saw,
was just like, don't walk away. Don't bend down and tie your
yeah,
shoes. Don't pick your nose. Don't, like,
exactly. Just
it's like,
sit still only means have your bum on the chair. I've got
exactly.
photos I sent to my friend where I had Hugh, and he's meant to be sitting on a chair, and his feet were over the back of the chair, and his head, but technically he had his bottom on the chair. He was like, "I am within the rules. There is nothing you can say to me. I am sitting on the chair." That's what he said.
You said that was your kid?
Yeah,
Yeah, see,
yeah,
that
that's
only happens with your own kid because other people's kids maybe they're too afraid of you or too respectful of strangers, but your own kids, man, they really push it. They push the limits.
yeah.
Yeah. So what is your favorite thing to paint or what type of client is your favorite to paint? You've already said that you don't do a lot of official portraits. Is it families? Is it individuals? Is it children?
I actually really, really profoundly like the mix. So I would be much less happy if I were to get stuck on, um, I don't know,
Just
men in their
children.
50s
Yeah,
or
yeah.
children.
Yeah, yeah.
I actually went through a spell where this exactly happened to me just by the law of Sod's law. I had um, a month where everyone was male and in their 70s, and or 2 months even. And honestly, by the end of it, I was just like, do you know what? I'm fed up with bloody men. grey hair and these lovely looking men. They were just just really nice people, and I really wanted to paint them, but they all came thick and fast in one bulky group, and that would be true of any group. So I like a real mix, and I'm lucky that in general there is a mix. There are a few institutions, there are families, there are celebrations of life, celebrations of anniversaries, and moments, that rites of passage that people have. I had a really nice run of teenage boys recently. That's a nice, rather lovely, tender time that I don't always see a lot of. And so that's been really enjoyable. And I've actually got a little rash of a set of grandchildren who are all between the ages of 12 and 21 at the moment. And that's amazing. So, if you can have variety, I suspect that's great for me. I could always do with more variety in every possible direction, but I basically think I'm fairly lucky. I don't
Yeah.
just do professors. I don't just do children. I seem to have a nice mix,
Yeah.
and long may that continue.
Yeah. In fact, let's, now that you say that, let's actually just look at or scroll down your website. We're going to look more at some of these individually too, but yeah, you really do have a mix. I mean,
Yeah,
from this
there's
military guy, this a fisherman. Is that a fisherman here?
yeah, there's a fisherman. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and then you've got these adorable little kid. This reminds me of John Singer Sargent, that painting. I can't remember
Well,
what it's.
those are mine.
What's that?
Those are mine. That's my children now.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah, that's beautiful. So you own this painting?
Yeah.
You kept it.
It's behind me. Yeah.
That's awesome. It is gorgeous.
That's just the British version of what you guys have, the Royal Society of Portrait Painters. So we've just had that now as well,
Oh,
same
no
time as the
kidding.
one in.
And this one won, you're saying this won a prize there?
No, it didn't. No, it was just exhibited. It's a slightly different setup to yours, where the members exhibit every year, and there's a big open submission element to the show. So there's about 200 or 300 pictures in total.
Oh, so it's more like a
Members,
salon.
yeah, yeah, very much so. Yeah,
Okay, okay. So,
yeah,
okay, so tell me a little bit about your process in composition, choosing clothing, I mean,
yeah.
how much, I mean, what part do you play? What part does the client play?
I don't know how it goes for you, but I do tend to think that it's about 50-50.
Okay.
So there's a guy wearing furs on the top left.
Yeah.
Um, so that guy, he's called Henry Conway, and he's a fashionista over here, and he's a lovely guy. He's in London. There was no way he wasn't going to choose his outfit.
Yeah.
He's a very flamboyant guy. He loves his clothes, and so this is not a circumstance where I'm going to pitch in with, oh well, no, I'm not going to paint that. And it was, why would I? Because it was
Mm-hmm.
great. He came with these amazing kind of very old school clothes on. But B, I think clothes are so intimately wrapped up in people's identity that you have to go with the flow a little bit. So it would be more that I would forbid certain things, um, more than I would tell someone what to wear. Obviously, some color that's just jarring with everything else, I would say, or maybe not that one. Um, and to that extent, you just say in advance, could you pick out, a handful of things that you really like, and we'll go from there. That
Mm-hmm.
tends to be do it. So they've got options. Everything they've bought you to see is something they like,
Mm-hmm.
and you might do it that way. I don't know how other people do it, but
Oh, I
I
imagine
don't
it's
go.
all over the board.
Yeah, I don't go to a commission. I don't know about you, but I do go in completely blind with a blank canvas, and we build it right there and then. So it's it's often quite spontaneous,
You go
and
in. Does that mean that you're going? Because you had said this before that when you left school, one of the things that was difficult was you had to figure out how to have a mobile studio. And we never talked about that. So is that what you mean? That you're constantly on the go? You're working in their homes, in their spaces?
very often, yeah. Um, so I would and still do drive to somewhere. I may not know what the light's going to be like. Again, imagine this coming out of my strict and rigorous training, right?
Mm-hmm.
Uh, you could end up in the bathroom, and getting the right light there.
You're
Or
kidding. Has that actually
you could,
happened?
yep,
So
yep,
you
that's
walk around
happened.
their house and you're like, oh, the bathroom's got the best light. Let's sit on the toilet.
Almost, not quite that extreme. Um,
Wow.
I've painted in all sorts of places, but again, it gives you it's like a kind of exercise, an exercise in quickly working out exciting light angles, etc., etc., and figuring it out. I mean, again, it's a bit of a high wire act, but it's really enjoyable. I love that part of it.
So you don't
You have
bring all
nothing.
these professional lights and whatnot with you. You just go to their space and work with what they have.
Yeah, I don't take any lights with me at all. Um, if
Wow,
has there
you
been
are
an
old
example
school.
where
I love this.
or mad? I'm feeling madder and madder the more I talk to you, Jeff. I thought that was completely normal.
Yeah.
Um,
No, no, I think it's awesome. There's something sort of liberating about it. Like it's just you, the brushes,
oh,
the canvas. You show up and just work with what you've got. I mean, there's something almost sportsmanship like about it. Hey, and that goes back to
yeah.
your childhood. You grew up in rolling around the grass and playing sports, you said. So there you go.
So maybe the sort of spontaneity bit has been built in. But I do think it keeps you. You were saying, do you enjoy your commission? I really do enjoy them, and possibly an element of that is that it's really actually great fun. It's fun to do it. You
Hmm.
turn up, you've got people in their own environment. That's important. It's true to them. They're at home, and so you can then actually there's a lot of latitude. You can then do a number of things. Occasionally, I lament not having the lovely light I have here, which is very high and very very pure of heart. But also, having the pressures of an entirely alien environment, it sometimes throws up unexpected happy accidents that you can only get from nature. You can only get that from working from life. And
Hmm.
those things are very, very rich and very giving, generous elements of your painting process that in being too set in your ways or rigorous, you would miss that because you would never entertain it. Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Oh,
So
totally know
it's
what you mean. Yeah.
also there is the flip side, which is, you have wonderful light for two sittings and then out comes the sun and ruins everything. And you haven't, it's just you haven't had enough time and now you're completely ruined because so then you have to be very flexible and you have to have taken a lot of photos in those previous two sittings.
Yeah.
um
And you're in
and
England too, where it's cloudy, sunny, cloudy, sunny. So that's got to be a constant frustration.
it is, and actually it's a problem here because we're in the north of England, so actually when the sun is high in the summer, it doesn't matter if you've got north light or south light, half of the day it's coming in the north anyway.
Oh,
So
what? Seriously?
because it goes so because we're so high up on the globe, obviously, we've got this lovely, amazing light where it's light at 3 in the morning and it's dark at 11 at night. So, obviously, if you think about how much of the circle of that kind of travel of the sun through the sky, a lot of it's coming in the north anyway.
So
I
it's
mean,
just
you've got better
so high in the sky that it's spilling.
behind.
It's not
Yeah,
literally on the
exactly.
north side, though. It's just so high that it's creeping in.
If you were in your studio early in the morning or late at night, it would be coming in north windows. Yeah. But
Wow,
it
but
doesn't
oh
matter.
my gosh, that is crazy. Oh, that makes sense because it's east, north, and east, or north and west, as it's. Oh my gosh, I
Yeah.
never thought about
It,
that.
it rises north, northeast, sets north, northwest. Yeah. But I
Yeah,
mean, it's not a big. It would be overblowing it to say that this is a curse for painters here. We mainly have very steady weather because it's usually fairly, well, not always overcast, but you get your opportunities with changeable weather. It's certainly nothing like what some places are where it's just wall to wall sunshine or whatever. I mean, we don't have that ever.
yeah. Yeah, no kidding. Well, we do in Utah. It's amazing. Well, all winter long it seems like it's cloudy, but all summer
Oh,
long
really?
it's just endless sun. It's so
It
amazing.
is
My studio is so bright all summer long.
really.
Oh, I love it.
So you can see it then, yeah.
Yeah, I love it. So, it's funny this whole North Light thing though, because I interviewed Carlo Russo quite a while ago, and I think it
Hmm.
was him, and we got all hung up on the equator, like what happened to the equator. And that's even weirder because half the year it actually is in the north, just barely. It's high in north, and half the year it's high
Yeah.
in south. And we're like,
Oh
okay,
God.
that's a
Yeah.
trip. So if you're working on the equator, or if you're working in
Yeah.
Australia,
So
you've got south light that you're after. That's what you want is south light.
yeah.
Yeah. Stuff we don't think about much.
Sure. I know, but I mean, if you're on equator, presumably you've got blue skies a lot, so it actually really matters
Mm-hmm.
because that square of light marching across your studio is really annoying.
Yeah, it is.
Um, yeah,
Yeah.
maybe you have a lot of window
Well,
light
I what I
and
do
a
is I
lot.
have a skylight. So what I do is because it is so bright, is my skylights are frosted, and that takes out the hot
Uh,
spot of the sun when it's directly above. It's amazing. It works beautifully. So
okay,
yeah,
that makes yeah. Yes, well, light is the backbone of it all, isn't it?
it is. It
Yeah.
is. So as you're moving around people's houses, I'm assuming you're going near windows. You're going, under, next to lamps, next to light in the ceiling, just trying to find anything that looks good.
Yeah. Yeah, and then there are times when you accept, for example, something extremely flat light-wise.
Can you
But
give me an example of that in your portraits here?
okay, well, that little girl in the middle at the top,
This one?
in that one, yeah. So she lived lives in a house which had, is quite typical of the south of England. They're quite low windows, so if you're standing up, like the
Yeah.
windowsill is mid thigh, say,
Yeah, the light's
and
like
then
right here. It's like quite high or
yeah,
quite low.
it's low, and so it's. I mean, I just decided I would keep that and have her very, very flatly lit, and then just turn her until we got some shading on that other side. So that wouldn't have been my choice, but actually I enjoyed it.
Oh my
Again,
gosh,
it was
it's amazing lighting though. I think
it was a different, yeah.
yeah, it's so flattering. She's just beautiful. So tell me
Um,
about the
she,
turn her, turn her, turn her. I mean,
well, I
I
started
can
off
speculate what you
where,
mean by that, but can you expound
okay,
more on that?
yeah, so if she were to turn to her right and
Yeah.
start twisting towards the light, you literally have nothing. I mean, there's the darks of her hair, and that's it. You've got nothing to offset those. She had that nice pearly skin,
Yeah.
and so I then start moving to her left. I start corkscrewing around her and keep her turning away from the window so that she is as out of the light as she can be in that very, very large windowed space.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I grabbed my darks by the back door, as it were, with that kind of light. And again, it's just that's what you have to think when you're in the environment and you have to think, okay, how am I going to get some definition on this very pale skinned little girl? But there is a solution there, and that was it for that one.
Okay, so that was
Um,
another example of me mixing up the process and the model because I thought you meant turning her form, but you literally you're turning rotating the model in front of the window until you get exactly what you want.
yes.
But let's talk
Yeah.
about turning the form though, because I don't know, are you a Sargent fan? You must be based on the way you paint.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, because I mean, to me, I mean, you're a little bit different, but you're almost like a Sargent reincarnated. I mean, you've just got a very similar aesthetic.
Frankie.
And one of the things that is so amazing about John Singer Sargent that you are also so good at is just taking a flat form like this and with very subtle color shifts and even more subtle value shifts, creating form.
Mm. Well, that's it. Don't you find that's the fun of it? Like, I mean, it
And the
is,
challenge of it.
and the challenge of it. Yeah, how to turn a flattish surface like a forehead.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think, I mean, I wouldn't be able to put every single dot every I and cross every T on how it's done. I think a lot of it is feel, but obviously the subject of losing your edges is in there, and on everything about what you've just said of shifting colours and shifting tones, where to plant your accents, and how to get that ribbon of light to travel in such a way that makes a three-dimensional shape without too many bells and whistles. So it's kind of understated what you're doing, what you're trying to. And with greater or lesser success, I think that one's gone pretty well. I was happy with that one.
Pretty
But there are
well.
tons
Yeah, it's brilliant.
that goes well. Yeah, but it's really hard. But equally, that's why we keep doing it over and over again, try and find solutions to these questions. But yeah, I think softening edges where you don't want people to look, but it has to still stand up in terms of its structure. And so looking at her forehead, the bulb that children have, especially the top half of the forehead where they've got this big bit of extracranial structure
Mm-hmm.
there. You don't need that to be sharp. It's not important where the edge is. It doesn't matter. It's disappearing into that little bit of hair there. Just lose it. You don't need it.
Hmm.
What's it saying? It's not saying anything interesting. So, and it helps with that three-dimensionality. And there'll be other little passages like that in every one of the paintings where I try to make the right decision. It's difficult, but just lose something and say very little about it.
Hmm.
Like the edge of her dress, that's another thing. It didn't strike me as important that the edge of her dress drifting into the light side.
Right here.
Uh,
Oh no, here.
uh, on the sleeve, yeah.
Yeah, but here's
It's
interesting
not,
too. This is something I don't
yeah,
think I ever would have done, and I love it.
just
Um,
soften it out.
it's so soft. It just blends right into her skin, but
Well,
it
but
works
then a little
beautifully.
sharp bit of hair next door to it to take your eye, the little dark part, yeah, that bit,
Yeah,
that needed to be in order not to make that area too soft. Because don't you find if everything is too soft, then that in and of itself draws the eye.
right.
So if you want the eye to gloss over something, you've got to be quite particular about what you choose to lose. You can't lose everything because people are going to ask questions. Well, why is that looking so weird there? And they'll ask that question, and now they're looking at it.
Yeah.
um, so you've got to pick your poison, and I'm fairly confident that half of every painting could be softened out, and the right number of accents remain, and it would work. And there are people who do this so well. And one of the other ones I like is Olga Boznanska, probably butchering the pronunciation, a Polish artist, a woman, and you can Google her hands on Instagram, and it's basically there's nothing there. It's just a couple of highlights on the odd fingernail, and you just think, God, how the hell is that happening?
Well, let's
And it's really,
I'm just curious. Let's do that. Let's Google her. We've never done this on the podcast before, but I'm really curious about that. So is this like what you're talking about? A hand like this
yeah,
that's just
rather particularly. Um, Here's one. I'm sending them to you on Instagram.
oh, you are. Okay.
Um,
Oh, wow.
anyway, that lower one is a slightly better image, but that's my point. I mean, if anyone is teaching a lesson on how not to miss an opportunity to say little and lots, it's that. I just love it. I mean, it's not exactly how I would paint, but I just think
It's
it's the
so
most wonderful.
gritty.
Yeah, it's
Yours
so
is so
yummy. And
smooth and like buttery, and this is almost like harsh and gritty. I love it. I love them both, but it almost surprises me that you like this because it's so different.
oh, I know, but I think taking the paints aside, I would love to paint thicker, actually, I think, but it's just the way she's seeing what's important. I
Yeah.
love so little to say. There's no upper knuckle. That's
My
what's right. Don't need it.
gosh. Yeah, those are gorgeous hands. Man, oh man. Yeah, I mean, I
So I
shouldn't be
always
surprised. I mean, we all have diverse tastes. I love this. I love your work. So yeah. But yeah, it's gorgeous. So let's go back to yours again. I want to talk a little bit about what you said about the forehead. So you had said
uh
two things. You're like, the kids have the bulbous forehead more than adults. But you said you soften this edge for two reasons. One, because let me see if I remember this correctly. One, because you didn't think it needed attention, like you didn't want to draw attention there. That wasn't your focus. And the other
hmm
was that it actually helped describe the form. Am I getting that
Yeah.
right? So
Sounds so contradictory when you say it, Jeff.
it sounds so what?
Um, Contradictory. But
Well,
I
that's why I
think
want to talk about it because I don't think it sounds contradictory, but I want you to elaborate a little bit more about that. I think you're right about both of those things. I mean, of course you're right about both of those things. You're incredible, but I do want you to elaborate a little bit more about on that, if
it's
possible.
hard to, no, I think it's hard to explain it because what you're effectively saying is by doing very little in certain areas, you're giving more information, which
Hmm.
doesn't make sense. I think the root of it, though, is that given that the eye can't focus everywhere all at once, you are having to make these decisions in certain places anyway. So it's not that it doesn't matter the top of the forehead. It's that in relation to her right eye, our left eye, and to some extent the other one, it's just not important. And so I want the eye to travel over that area, not get particularly stuck there, if possible, and wind up back down happily in the region of the eyes again. So it's a way, if you're softening things, but there is enough information for us to buy it, basically, to believe it. I think it's a way of shipping the eye back around the field of focus to where you want it to be. So sharp things, bright things, high contrast, that tends to be attractive to us. We tend to look for those things. That's what we want to see. That's how the human eye seems to work. So the top of a forehead, within the field of vision that's on that face, it just is an area, especially given that it's a soft turn floating away into the hairline there, where you might find an excuse to say very little. People who do this really well, obviously all the 17th century artists, Sargent you mentioned, but you'll find if you look at a Velasquez, he is just cleaning everyone's clock on this. There'll only be a handful of sharp lines in any given face. And a lot of it is just not really there, and yet it's incredibly satisfying and believable. So he is saying very little, but communicating much. And it's really difficult, but
Hmm.
I don't think I do that well. But it's a very, I do aspire to that. I aspire to have areas which are blank of information, which are not busy as much as I aspire to have areas which are very sharp and captivating. That's the hope.
Hmm.
So those areas where you really want people to look, you have higher contrast, more sharp lines, more accents, um, and then other areas really quite nearby if necessary. We're talking about the collar and that hair, which are very blank comparatively.
I'm gonna ask you maybe a hard question here.
Yeah.
Maybe not. If you want it, hard edges where people look, why here and why
Yeah.
here? There's got to be more to it than
Well,
that.
it's a judgment. It's not a simple question of putting, that vignette option you've got on Instagram where you can kind of just fade everything out from the middle.
Right. Right.
Um, you're you've got to choose, and there's got to be a little language, a pattern of focus as it goes around the canvas. I mean, again, sometimes back to Velasquez, sometimes the sharp line he has decided upon is the one under the hat, cutting across the forehead, and then the entire face is faded out. So it's not a question of it will be the eyes every time, and then every feature that regresses from the eyes will be blurry. It's not like that. It's
Okay.
possibly important that that jawline is sharp. Plus, I think there's a haughtiness to her, which is best expressed by that jawline being sharp. And I didn't see much character, what would be the word, heightening possibility in having the forehead be as sharp. It just didn't seem as important to me. Another artist would have made several different decisions and come up with a very lovely portrait of her. And it would have been interesting to see what they would have done. But for me, I felt that that jutting jaw, the fact that she's really giving you her 100-mile stare, and she did. She was very direct, very possessed little girl. She was very striking about her, actually, that she was so direct. And so those lines I've selected, are lines that I felt helped express her character, contributed to a pattern of focus that came and went in various areas. And yeah, the forehead is a soft line there. The jawline is a sharp line there. You know, I've done my best effort to sort of lose that far cheek going away into certain areas.
Mm.
But try to keep that lower jawline a bit strong again. I liked her jutting chin. Not really that fussed about the back of the neck. Not that fussed about the sleeve. So, you know, those are a few examples of places where I've decided to forget about areas of focus entirely and just lose the edges. But the thought was just like that was just my slate of decisions came out that way.
Okay.
I wonder if it would be different if I painted her now, and I'm sure it would have been different if somebody else had painted her. Yeah.
So is it fair to summarize it this way, that there are certain principles, one being everything can't be soft and everything can't be sharp. You have to kind of balance those two features depending on where you want to move the eye. The eye is going to go to where you make it sharp. The second principle being there is no formula to what should be sharp and what should be soft. That's the job of the artist.
That is perfectly put, Jeff.
Okay. Okay. I just want to make sure I understand it. And, you know, and also I want to say that I picked these two out because I like them. But I wanted you to comment on them because they're so bold. And that's another thing that I love about Sargent is he would do those crazy sharp edges. And Velasquez. You know, we did a podcast on Velasquez. I have an art historian named Micah Christensen that comes on and talks about Velasquez. You'll have to listen to that if you're a fan. But I'm a huge fan of Velasquez, and I agree that's one of his superpowers, to really do beautiful things with edges.
Amazing. Yeah. Amazing.
Well, I'm going to look through and pick out a few of my favorites, but if there's one that you would like to talk about that might have a story behind it, story meaning your experience with them, or maybe something significant about them, then please tell me. But this is one of my favorites here.
You choose. Well, that's Flora, my daughter.
I keep picking your kids. I wonder I wonder why. That's got to be a coincidence. Huh?
Yeah, no, they sit every year, poor things. They're getting used to it now. That was at the beginning of lockdown. And actually, the one you chose before of them both sitting on the sofa, that's the end of lockdown. And actually, I think they have a similar vibe because this was in a period where we were all locked up. And I mean, in the UK, you were very much so for about 2 months in spring, as we all were in 2020. So I couldn't go to my commissions. It was just a complete, everything stopped. And so, cue the procession of sitters in the family. Flora went first. She sits very well. And I did my husband and I did my son.
Can we see those? Which ones are those?
Yeah. So Rob is the one backlit a little bit. Dual light, maybe down. He might be down. Yeah, so him. Second left next to the lady in the official outfit. Yeah.
Ah.
So
that's
that
cool.
was him. I like occasionally little trips into the world of dual light. It's a fascination. find it really interesting to see how it affects everything. And it really does for me. It's just completely bonkers, but really fun.
That's beautiful.
Um,
So you must have
yeah.
quite a collection of paintings of your family.
Yes. They're not, I don't think, going to thank me for it in the long run because
You
there's
don't
going
think
to
so?
be, there's going to be hundreds. There's already about 10, 10 at least. Anyway,
I
that's
wouldn't
up to
stop
them.
doing it because, I didn't do it. I painted my family. No, I didn't. I painted my family a little bit. I painted my twins when they were 2.5. I painted my youngest son, he's 16 now, when he was 12. And that's it. Other than painting them in paintings, like multi-figure paintings, I included them as characters in biblical scenes, but I don't own any of
Okay.
those. So for me, it's
Right.
always been a plumber sink issue. It's like I need to keep painting other people, pay the bills, and never painting my own kids. And now I regret it. But so you're
No,
doing a good thing.
I do it partly totally selfishly to experiment on an idea,
Mm,
and also because they are available,
yeah.
um, and because I'm enjoying watching them grow up and they go through weird and wonderful phases. The
Hmm.
other thing is I work relatively quickly, so I have the luxury of a couple of non-commission projects every year, um, and I might well do them in that time. Yeah, so it is a luxury though, exactly as you say, and I dare say when they don't live here, when they're older, I'll do them less because obviously they won't be around. But
Hmm.
for the time being, they
Yeah.
get quite asked to sit.
I think they'll love it. My kids still, I think they appreciate seeing themselves in paintings, even though they're not in my studio. They're out and about, like in different buildings and stuff. And they're like, that's me, So they enjoy that.
Yeah, and I think you've painted them, and that's the important thing.
Yeah.
It's even better seen by people. So, mine are going to go into a tube at some point and live in a tube.
No, they won't. They'll end up in history books. I guarantee it. Incredible.
Yeah,
Um,
so Bob went second, and then I don't know if Hugh is still. This is the one where he decided to sit with his feet over the back of the chair. I
which one is that?
he's not up there. I've taken him off.
Oh, you have.
Not out of anger.
No, you're like, you're going off the website. Okay, I love this one. So this one appeals to me because there was a period of time where I did this kind of graphic thing with figures, and that kind of appeals to me. And so tell me a little bit about this one.
Well, you're right. You've hit your nail on head. I just wanted to do something where there was lots of different pattern and no. Um, I usually think of myself as surrounding people with loads of space, and then I'll go to great lengths to explain the space around them. And I just want that's a really, really close friend of mine. And she was up visiting, and I made her sit for me because I wanted to paint. She's got this amazing red hair. I wanted to
Hmm.
paint lots of pattern, lots of light and dark, absolutely no space. I mean, this is all compared to my usual thing.
Mm-hmm.
To to breathe in terms of having lots of blanks. So it's a little bit of a challenge to what I was just saying, which is you must have as many empty spaces as you do busy spaces in a painting. And I thought, is that true? Maybe we can have the busy background and the busy pattern and the busy cushion and the flowers and the dog and the woman all at once.
It works for me. Yeah, it's one of
I
my favorites.
enjoyed it. It was so fun. I was real like a holiday. I was great.
So this
So
hand, by the way, is incredible. It's just
oh,
like
thank you.
it's kind of like the ones you showed me from Olga. What was,
Osmanska.
yeah, what you said. um, yeah. I wish I could zoom in, but
Sorry.
it
Yeah.
seems like there's very little information there, and yet it's so convincingly three-dimensional, beautifully painted.
Oh, that's yeah.
So
Well, I
how did you
did
do the
think I had to get
dog?
rid of a few. Hiccup sat for me not very well, I have to say, and I did take some photos of Hiccup.
Okay,
When you look at dogs, so I mean, I have dogs. I don't know if you do.
I do.
If you give them a step, then they just get off the lap and come and say hi to you.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a bit of a challenge, but we did, yeah, we got what we could and took photos of the rest of it.
Yeah, I was trying to
Um,
just take photos of my dog just to have, and it kept licking the phone. I'm like, will you hold still? You know, as soon as you give it attention, it's like comes right up to it. Yeah, they're brutal to paint. Oh, it's
that's the
really
problem.
well done. Okay, and let's look at one more. Um, Again, if there's any that, well, let's look at this one. It's very simple composition, but it's another one of those relatively flat lit ones.
Very flat. That's in my studio, actually. That's as flat as I can get, likewise. And I did actually open, I've got lower windows too around the kind of normal window level. And I seem to remember opening one of those. I don't know why. I mean, her skin is, I think she almost has a thing where it's very Celtic, where if she even goes out in the sun at all, I mean, any rays of sun, she gets a kind of reaction. So
Mm,
she's got a kind of albinism light type thing where she can't show this extraordinarily pale skin to any sunlight at all. But it was
mm,
just such a lovely color. It was so ridiculously pale. So I don't know why those particular colors. Actually, as it happens, that's what she walked into the studio wearing. She is one of these five teenagers. She's the eldest. She's 21. Actually, she's not a teenager. That I've got from one family at the moment, commission-wise. So she's a relatively recent commission, and I just thought she had the most lovely expression. She was wearing that color. The skin tone is extraordinary, very rare. I don't think I've got it pale enough, actually. I think I've failed to communicate exactly how luminous she is. Um, and yeah, you're then trying to use a very pale end of the spectrum, value wise, to say everything you need to say about the three-dimensional forms. So a lot of, as you say, turning corners with subtle changes and all that sort of thing, trying to get that right. But also, she just had this very nice expression, direct, honest, open, confident young woman. And so I thought we would go with that. And they, all of them, everyone in this family has a mane of hair. So
mm.
uh, I'm enjoying this particular family. They're all, yeah, they're all good.
Do you have a favorite flesh color to paint? Because when
No,
you describe her as being so fair, when I get someone that fair, it's like, it's like I'm in a candy store. I mean, to me, that's the best flesh to paint because it's so translucent that you can
yeah.
see all this color in it. You know, you see blues and pinks and greens but then you get someone who's been in the sun a lot and they're just all orange.
Yes, so I suppose it depends on your ethnicity, doesn't it? But I think, yeah, it's a very pearly, marble-like quality, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
We live in a part of the world with very little ethnic diversity, so I actually lament. I've got a friend who got to sit for me, and he's a doctor originally from Nigeria, and I actually had a very similar experience with him. Those lovely dark tones, incredibly blue, incredibly purple. It's just heavenly. So I
That would
think
be another favorite. Yeah, really dark skin. Yeah.
just so rich. And so I think everything, again, is back to the variety question. In a perfect world, you would really just get every available type. But I actually agree with you that somebody who has been kind of on their holidays type tanned,
Mm-hmm.
it's quite a uniform. I mean, this is white skin, I suppose. It's quite a uniform tone, isn't it? And you might lose some of the variety that would exist if they were just their natural bedrock color.
Yeah.
Because we get a tan and we've gone on holiday for 2 weeks and we've come back looking browner. You know, it's not. It's a kind. That's what happens to you when you go into the sun. So it's not. It's a sort of artificial thing, isn't it? Like it's not them and their natural.
Yeah. It's just almost too even.
It's too even. Yeah, it's sort of perfect. So yeah, that's possibly not the best time. And it's ironically, I mean, in the UK, everyone would say, I'd love you to come in the summer because we all look so healthy.
Oh,
And
no. You're like,
I said,
no.
well, don't worry about it. Actually, spring's a lovely time.
I'd be like, how about December?
Yeah. I can have the depth of winter, it's fine. It's fine.
Yeah. Okay. So so one question that I ask everyone, and if
Yeah.
you've listened to the podcast, you know what I'm going to ask you, but that is if you have one piece of advice that you would give a aspiring young artist, what would it be?
This is so boring, but it would be to work as much as you can from life.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I just don't think you can get a better education. Not always kind. You're going to have a few slings and arrows coming your way. Light will change, models will move, but you're not erecting a barrier between yourself and your inspiration, and you're available to all of the strange hiccups and peculiarities that you'll only get if you're there looking at it from life. And yeah, it's basically the rich matter that you're extracting from the world that is going to make you a good artist. So I could not place a high enough value on that. That's not to say be dogmatic and never ever paint from a photograph. That's not really the point. But the point is to value your from life work, because I think it's the bedrock of good painting. Even if, like I say, you're going to end up using references as well on the same picture even. I have nothing against that. I'm not snotty about it at all. But I just think that if I was starting again, I would end up doing a similar training to that which I did, which is to work a lot from, I mean, exclusively from life, in order to get those fundamental principles really down. Yeah, so I'm afraid it would probably be the same as almost everyone else you've asked, I should think.
No,
But
you'd be surprised. Not that many people. I might have had one other person say that. There's been a lot of
wow.
diversity in that question, in answers to that question. So I really appreciate that. I know my guests will as well. But Francis, it's been a huge honor to talk to you. I'm a huge fan, even more now that I know you. So thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Seriously. It's
My
great.
pleasure. Thanks for tuning in to the Undraped Artist Podcast. If you enjoyed it, subscribe. And if you could, leave a comment or review. That really helps the channel. Please share the show with your friends, and if you're feeling generous, consider a monthly donation at theundrapedartist.com. Thanks again for watching. We'll see you next week.